the next step is really testing. Hopefully what you're doing is you're building this new website in some type of test environment, right? Where you've got your old website still running, it's still there. And you've got a development website where you can work on this. And of course, no one can see that development site but your staff. It's not, live on the internet to the world. So testing and getting prepared for your launch is very important. Now you will typically see, just so you know, even with a very well done redesign project, good execution and planning, you may see a bit of a dip in your organic search and the organic traffic you get from Google. You may see a little bit of a dip. That is fairly common. Now, you'll quickly recover from that if your new site was built well. Good accessibility, good SEO, good content. You will bounce back. But don't be afraid of seeing a little dip. If the website redesign project wasn't executed well, if there were major SEO mistakes made, for instance, if some page sections moved and the old locations aren't redirected to the new, or if you launched a big area with 200 new pages and they only have 50 words on each page, or major SEO issues like that, you may see that dip and it will stay and you won't recover that traffic. So there's a lot of SEO considerations when you talk about testing and launching. So definitely test at least for the target browsers that you think your audience is going to use. And you can see that information in Google Analytics. There's an area in there that lists, how many mobile users versus desktop, which browsers, which mobile phones, is it iPhone, Android, what have you. At least I would say test with real devices, real computers, test those target browsers that represent 80 or 90% of your traffic. Do mobile testing for sure, and test all those interactive elements. Make sure like your donation system, if it's integrated, do a test donation, right? Make sure it actually works. So if your site launches and it's awesome and you get traffic, you don't want that broken. Test the links that go offsite to other tools, and test the speed for sure. There's a free tool from Google called Page Speed Insights. You can put in any page on your website and it will run it through a system and test it for speed. That is another thing too. Speed and mobile usability is something Google is putting a ton of they're putting a ton of emphasis on that now. So it looks like the most of you for the content tools use either a mishmash or some kind of tool. That's pretty typical. Almost 40% though, so do you have no tool at all for content? So I would think about that. It can really help. It's going to help make producing great content cost less typically. We got one more poll tool I'll launch too, just about the branding and voice. So the tool that we have a really good tool we use. It's kind of expensive, but we use it. So you may not really want this, but we're doing so many redesigns that we pay for this tool and use it all the time. It's super cool. It's a tool called Sauce Labs, and it basically lets you use your computer and your browser. It's all browser based, and you can literally launch a virtual device, a virtual computer of like any kind. You can say, I want a Windows 10 computer running this version of Firefox. I want to launch a iPhone 10 Max running this version of Safari. I mean, you can do whatever you want. So this is a very efficient way for us to run our clients' websites through all the testing we need to do before it launches. We have a pretty robust Q&A, methodology for that because we want that website to launch and to, be super successful. Another tool, like I said, I mentioned the Page Speed Insights. So this is a tool that it's free. Unfortunately, you do have to put in each page one at a time. But typically as a website is being built, every different pages are using the same templates, right? Each page is not a unique thing unto itself. So we will use this tool to test the home page, to test various pages. So you get a desktop and a mobile score. It separates those two. It's from 0 to 100, 0, of course, being the worst. So we typically want desktop to be in the 90s if possible. We typically want mobile to be, at least over 50, but in the 70s and 80s is great. It's definitely harder to optimize a site for mobile if you've got great imagery and images and a lot of content. It just kind of hurts speed on mobile. But this was for a redesign of the Masonic Charities website, and their scholarships is huge. The scholarship section, that is a place that is very important to them. One of their main missions is scholarships, right? So we wanted to make sure that page was fast. So that tested 96 out of 100, which is pretty dang good. I talked about a little bit about those SEO considerations, and they can actually have a major impact on how successful your new website is, right? The biggest SEO consideration being, are you moving pages from one location to another? So, meaning, say you have, xyz.com/mission, and that's your current website. If you've done a redesign and now that link is xyz.com/our-mission, you may have links out there on the internet all over that are going to that mission page. You may even have paid ads. You may have social media poster links. So if you just drop that, make that change of location, and don't have a redirect, what we call a 301, that points to the new content, you're going to have a major SEO problem. And as Google crawls your site too, it may be using partially old data, and it may start to hit a ton of 404 errors. You may have links in your content that maybe if you moved over content, you forgot to update, pointing to the wrong section. That's bad too. So you really want to make sure that if you have new locations for content, you are using a 301 permanent redirect to point all those links to the new place. Also, if you do have content that's going away, that's absolutely no longer relevant. Say you used to have a location, food shelf or something that's gone. You close it down, you have something somewhere else. It's okay for that old content to 404. You do want to let content 404 and not be found if it really did just go away and it's not relevant. So only redirect things that are relevant that you are still, doing. And then definitely review all that metadata. Review the title and the description, metadata in each page. Review your sitemap files. Make sure you have a good sitemap file. And that is not that file we talked about earlier where we're doing a visual layout. The Sitemap XML is what it is a file that's on your website that's not used by humans. It's used by things like Google, Bing, and other crawlers. And it's basically a directory, non-human readable directory of everything on your website. So make sure that is built correctly. Fortunately, WordPress and most of the systems out there do a really good job of just doing that automatically. You don't need to think about it. But do a final, SEO audit, accessibility audit right before launch. Just make sure that the new site is really tip top and ready to launch. So it looks like with this poll, branding and voice guide, a few of you asked what that is. So we could probably, I'll see if I can provide an example in that follow-up email. But basically the brand voice guide is a document that describes the colors your organization uses, the fonts, how the logo should be used, and how you speak, what kind of language and you speak and use in your content. And it looks like a lot of you, though, have one over 50%, which is I found typical in the nonprofit world. It seems like nonprofits have more communication talent in house, and they seem to have a clear idea of their mission and how to speak about it, which is good. So that's the last of the polls, it looks like. So we have a little bit of time left, about 10 minutes, which we try to leave at the end. So I'll open it up now. You can use that Q&A panel. If you're not familiar with that in Zoom, there's a button that says Q&A with some bubbles, and you can put some questions in there. And I have about 10 minutes of time to answer any questions you have. So also, if you missed any part of this, we will be very early next week. I think it's like Tuesday. The on-demand version goes up, and you'll get a link to that, which you can just watch as many times as you want. You don't have to register again. The follow-up email also, like I said, will have links to a lot of other things. It will have the workbook, all those different pages, worksheets and stuff that you could take advantage of. Would Arcstone provide a free audit of an existing nonprofit website? I got a question about that coming in. We often do, yes. Now, it's not sort of exactly the same as something that's 20, 30 hours. That's sort of like a product. We have different products. We have an accessibility audit, SEO audit, social media audits. We have like individual types of audits. But absolutely, we would be very happy to look at your website. And typically, in only about a half an hour phone call to maybe an hour, we can usually tell you, here are really the top 5 things you really, really need to look at. We can tell you very quickly if you have a major accessibility issue, major SEO issue, or technical things wrong, or let's say your CMS is totally not supported anymore and there's known like hacks for it. Really, all of that stuff we can tell you pretty quickly. Give a ballpark of a budget for a redesign. That is really tricky to do. We're actually developing a robust tool right now to try and do that, which we will probably make some part of that available to just the public. It's really tricky to give a ballpark without, we've done nonprofit websites that costs $5,000. We've done ones that cost 100,000. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. We are trying to develop some type of tool where you can put in the number of your pages. You can put in, we have a donation platform, email platform, whatever, like put in your integrations and it comes up with a rough ballpark. So we're actually working on that right now. That is hopefully something that I'll be able to email you all at some point to give you a better idea. Really though, if we see your website, if you want to talk to one of us, one of our strategy specialists or business development specialists, they can typically, if you want to kind of give us a little show and tell of your website and you have an idea of your goal for your redesign, we can typically give you a pretty good ballpark. So people are saying people are putting in the Q&A, they're not sure what path they want to go down. But it would be good to get sort of a baseline audit. That is a very good question. It is important to first figure out, what path you want to go down, right? And if you have a website that still is great for your branding, still represents your mission really well, still does a lot of stuff really well, we may not actually recommend a full redesign. We don't want you to spend a bunch of resources you don't need to spend, right? So we will look at that and be able to say, well, what is the new stuff you're doing? Can we do a partial redesign? It's just the navigation a little wonky, or do you want to provide a lot of new resources? Can we add a resource library to your existing site? So those are all the kinds of things we do explore. How long does a typical website redesign take? That's another really great question. So that actually varies a lot too. That can vary a lot. The biggest factors in how long does the redesign take, there's some big ones. A big one is how much of that content can be repurposed or even sometimes literally exported and imported. Content, I guarantee you, will take about 3 times longer than you think. That's actually been kind of typical. Many clients think the content will take X, and it takes roughly 2 to 3 times longer than they think. We try to advise, and if we are involved in that process, sometimes nonprofits, they have great communication staff and great people, and they'll take care of it. If we are involved, that's one of the big things we take a very fine-tooth comb to, because content is something that can trip people up. It takes more time than most people think. Another thing is platform. Are you switching platforms? That's a big thing. Sometimes if you're on a WordPress platform, you're on a modern WordPress site, it's not super outdated. What you can do is develop a new theme and really leave a lot of the other backend stuff intact, not have to touch it, not have to touch donations, not have to touch integrations with other things. If it's a facelift, really, a redesign of a facelift, in WordPress, that visual component of WordPress, that's called a theme. WordPress is broken into 3 big components: the core WordPress, the plugins, and then the theme. And so that is a very quick redesign too. Sometimes I would say the typical thing though, if you're talking about a full website redesign, the entire thing, it's usually, 6 to 10 weeks, something like that. Sometimes we have to do them quicker because of necessity, which unfortunately you don't want to be in that position. So we did actually have a client, Minneapolis Parks, actually. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Minneapolis. We have a wonderful, amazing park system. And Minneapolis Parks was actually using a proprietary content management system that a previous agency developed. which we really advise do not use some proprietary system, right? Use a standard system. So if you need to change vendors or find new staff or whatever, right? You're not on something weird. They run a proprietary system and they got an email from their agency. They're like, we're going to kill this thing off. We don't want to support it anymore. It's going away. So we had to turn around an entirely new site on an entirely new platform hosted by us too. We took over hosting in something like 5 weeks. I mean, it was a ridiculously short timeline. Now, the saving grace was their content and design was really good. So we moved that over. We were really doing the technical back end work of switching their platform. So thank you all for these great questions. Another question came in. What is the latest framework used on web pages that is easy to learn? And can you help with the conversion? So framework could mean a couple different things. I would definitely confidently say I feel like WordPress is the easiest to use. As far as a content management system, the WordPress system is the easiest to use. And also it has plugins that really change how web pages are built and how the content is built. There is something called Elementor. There's a bunch of other ones, which are plugins you add to WordPress. Many of those are actually free too, and they can really change how it works. So it's a lot easier to do custom layouts. Some of that now is not needed because the latest version of WordPress, they have moved to a new editor. The editor where you're actually putting in images, typing text, putting in links, doing your stuff, building your content. That editor now is something called Gutenberg. It's a new editor. And they've introduced something called the block editor, which is very cool because you can have little design components that maybe have a picture and a button and a link and some text. And you can replicate that over and over in your content just by searching for it in the block editor, dragging that block. So the modern WordPress websites now are really drag and drop, very interactive. It's very easy to learn. We actually, most of our website redesign projects include some kind of staff training component. That's kind of a component. What we typically do is we say, well, all your staff that really need to know this, we get on a Zoom call. We have a however long Zoom call. Maybe it's only an hour. If your site's very complicated, maybe it's a 2 to 3 hour Zoom call, which we record and we go through the whole steps of how you manage your website. And then you have that recording forever. So new staff come in, it's very easy to train people. So I'm not sure what you meant by framework, but hopefully it answers the question. I would definitely say WordPress is the easiest. It is much easier too if you work with an agency too. You're not left to your own. I would say that some of those other ones like Wix and Squarespace, they seem easy. They do have some things that are easier to do in those than perhaps maybe an open source tool like WordPress or Drupal. But I would say the list of things they make easy is very small. And actually the list of things that they make hard, very difficult and hard is much larger. Because again, you're playing in the sandbox, the Squarespace, Wix, that's all hosted by them. They really limit what you can do, because they're supporting it all. So a couple more questions climbing in. How do you know if you're on the latest version of WordPress? Well, if you have a login to your website, the very first page after you log in is the dashboard. And at some point on that page, it's going to have a little box. And if you're out of date, it's going to say there's a new version XYZ, click here to update. That's probably the easiest way. So if you have a login for the site, you can find it right on that sort of dashboard page. And you can potentially click the update button and update it, or download the new version and kind of do it yourself. But be very, very careful. Be very careful about updating your WordPress core system. I would even extend that to be careful about updating major plugins. Say you have a form plugin, donation plugin. Sometimes those versions are not super backwards compatible and you can break a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, we have seen where clients have updated something and it takes the website offline completely and you can't even log into WordPress. And you have to physically go into the WordPress database and make a change to get it to work again. So that's worst case scenario, not super, super common. But it does happen, especially if you go from very old versions of a plugin or WordPress to a very new version. Lots of things may have changed. So the vast majority of the redesigns we do, we also usually take over hosting, because our sort of nonprofit WordPress hosting system we handle WordPress updates for the customers. We handle the plugin updates for the customers. We keep on top of all of that, right? We track all of that. We track all known issues, hacks, bugs, everything. And because we're doing it for hundreds of websites at once, so it's very efficient for us. So that's a big benefit. If you at some point host with Arcstone, we take care of all of that. You don't even have to worry about updating WordPress. So, well, that is the time we have. That's noon. If there's any last questions, go ahead and throw them in there. Otherwise, thank you again so much for joining me. I know everyone's getting sick of Zoom and webinars and online, and so I appreciate your time today. Look for that follow-up email early next week. I think it's Tuesday. There will be a lot of additional resources in there. The link to watch this again, you can share it with other people. And again, just thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great day.